They laughed when she enlisted. At 5 feet 2 inches and barely 100 pounds, Private First Class Maya Chen looked more like she belonged in a library than a combat zone. Her drill sergeant called her paperweight. Her bunkmates nicknamed her Mouse. Even her own mother had whispered doubts the night before deployment, wondering if her daughter was strong enough for what lay ahead. But Maya Chen had steel running through her veins, even if nobody could see it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of October 15th started like any other at Forward Operating Base Phoenix in northern Iraq. The desert sun hadn't yet painted the horizon, but the heat was already building against the concrete barriers that surrounded their small outpost. Inside the operations center, 12 soldiers sat in metal folding chairs, their boots scuffing against the dusty floor as they waited for the morning briefing. Maya sat in the back row, her medical pack secured tightly to her side. The patch on her uniform read Combat Medic, but most of her unit still saw her as the girl who struggled to keep up during physical training. She'd proven herself in smaller engagements, treating shrapnel wounds and stabilizing injured soldiers, but she'd never faced anything like what intelligence was suggesting might come their way. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison stood at the front, his weathered face grim as he pointed to a map projected on the concrete wall. "We've got credible intel about insurgent activity in the Qasr district," he announced, his voice cutting through the morning stillness. 3 separate sources confirm weapons caches hidden in civilian compounds. Your mission is reconnaissance and evidence gathering, no direct engagement unless absolutely necessary. Maya shifted in her seat, her fingers instinctively checking the medical supplies strapped to her vest. Sergeant First Class David Morrison sat 2 rows ahead, his massive frame making the metal chair look like a child's toy. Behind him, Corporal Amanda Rodriguez drummed her fingers against her rifle, her eyes fixed on the map. To Maya's left, Specialist Jake Palmer cracked his knuckles, a nervous habit that had annoyed everyone since basic training. "You'll move in 2 squads," Harrison continued. "Alpha Team takes the eastern approach. Bravo covers the west. Keep your distance from civilian populations. Intel suggests the area has been evacuated, but we can't be certain. Standard patrol protocol applies. Eyes open, fingers ready, but no cowboy heroics." The lieutenant colonel's gaze swept across the room, landing briefly on Maya. She'd seen that look before. Doubt mixed with reluctant acceptance. Her medical training was valued, but her physical limitations were always a concern. At 100 pounds, she couldn't carry an unconscious soldier the way Morrison could. She couldn't provide the heavy fire support that Rodriguez offered. In the eyes of many, she was a liability waiting to happen. "Questions?" Harrison asked. Silence filled the room. These were experienced soldiers who'd run dozens of similar missions. They knew the drill. Get in, gather intelligence, get out. The Qasr district was supposed to be quiet, abandoned by civilians who'd fled when fighting intensified 3 months earlier. It should have been routine. But Maya's stomach churned with an uneasiness she couldn't shake. She'd learned to trust her instincts during her previous deployments. Something about this mission felt different, though she couldn't articulate why. The intelligence was too clean, too convenient. Insurgents didn't usually abandon valuable weapons caches without a fight. "Alpha Team, Morrison, Rodriguez, Palmer, and Chen," Harrison announced, reading from a clipboard. "Bravo Team will maintain overwatch from the ridgeline. You'll have air support on standby, but communication might be spotty due to terrain interference." Maya nodded, gathering her gear as the briefing concluded. Her medical pack weighed 30 pounds, nearly a third of her body weight, but she'd grown accustomed to the burden. Inside were bandages, morphine, IV fluids, and a dozen other supplies that could mean the difference between life and death for wounded soldiers. As the soldiers filed out of the operations center, Morrison approached her. At 6 feet 4 and 240 pounds, he towered over her like a mountain. His voice was gruff but not unkind. "Stay close today, Chen. Something doesn't feel right about this one." "What do you mean?" Maya asked, adjusting the straps on her pack. Morrison glanced around, making sure they weren't overheard. 3 separate intelligence sources all pointing to the same location? Civilian area conveniently evacuated? Feels like bait to me. Rodriguez joined them, her dark eyes serious. Morrison's right. I've been running patrols in this sector for 8 months. The locals don't just disappear overnight, not unless something big is coming. Palmer bounced on his feet, eager to move out. Maybe they finally got smart and cleared out before we showed up. Could make our job easier. Or it could make us sitting ducks, Morrison replied, his tone flat. Maya felt the knot in her stomach tighten. She trusted Morrison's instincts. He'd been in country for over a year and had an uncanny ability to sense trouble before it arrived. If he was worried, she should be too. The 4 soldiers made their final preparations in the equipment bay. Maya double-checked her medical supplies, ensuring every bandage and medication was properly secured. Her rifle felt heavier than usual as she slung it across her shoulder, though she'd fired it hundreds of times in training and twice in actual combat situations. Remember, Morrison said as they prepared to move out, we're there to observe and document, not to start a war. If things go sideways, we extract immediately. No heroes, no unnecessary risks. Maya nodded, though part of her wondered if avoiding risks would be possible where they were heading. The Qasr district had been a hotbed of insurgent activity for months. Coalition forces had lost 3 vehicles to improvised explosive devices in the area, and sniper attacks had increased dramatically over the past few weeks. The morning air was crisp as they walked toward the vehicle staging area. Their Humvee sat waiting, armored but not invincible. Maya climbed into the back seat, her medical pack taking up most of the space beside her. Morrison took the driver's seat, his hand steady on the wheel despite his earlier concerns. Comms check, Rodriguez said from the passenger seat, her voice crackling through their radio headsets. Alpha 1, clear, Morrison responded. Alpha 2, clear, Rodriguez confirmed. Alpha 3, clear, Palmer chimed in from the turret. Alpha 4, clear, Maya said, her voice steady despite the nervousness building in her chest. As they rolled through the main gate of Forward Operating Base Phoenix, Maya watched the familiar landscape scroll past. Barren hills stretched toward the horizon, broken by occasional clusters of mud brick buildings and narrow dirt roads. The area looked peaceful in the early morning light, but she knew appearances could be deceiving. The drive to Qasr district would take 45 minutes through increasingly hostile territory. Intelligence reports indicated they'd be entering an area where insurgents had established supply routes and possibly training facilities. Their mission was to confirm these reports and identify specific locations for future operations. Maya checked her watch, 0630 hours. By this time tomorrow, she'd either be back at base writing reports, or she pushed the darker thoughts from her mind. Focus on the mission, she told herself. Stay alert, stay ready, and trust in her training. The Humvee bounced over a particularly rough patch of road, causing her medical pack to shift against her side. The weight reminded her of why she was there, not to prove her physical strength or silence the doubters, but to keep her fellow soldiers alive when everything went wrong. And deep in her gut, Maya Chen had the growing certainty that everything was about to go very wrong indeed. The road to Qasr district wound through terrain that seemed designed for ambushes. Rocky outcroppings provided perfect cover for snipers, while deep ravines offered concealment for explosive devices. Maya watched the landscape through her window, noting every potential threat position that Morrison had taught her to identify. Contact Bravo team, Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. Alpha approaching checkpoint Zulu. No visual on civilian activity. Roads appear clear. The response came back immediately. Copy Alpha. Bravo has eyes on your position. We're seeing dust clouds approximately 2 clicks east of your location. Could be vehicle movement. Rodriguez tensed in the passenger seat. Natural or mechanical? Unknown at this time. Wind patterns don't match natural dust formation. Maya felt her pulse quicken. Dust clouds in this region usually meant one of 2 things: incoming sandstorms or enemy movement. The weather reports had called for clear skies all day. Morrison slowed the Humvee as they approached the outskirts of Qasr district. The first thing Maya noticed was the silence. No children playing in the streets. No merchants setting up their stalls. No elderly men gathering for morning tea. The absence of life was more unsettling than any direct threat. This place gives me the creeps, Palmer muttered from the turret, his voice tense despite his earlier enthusiasm. Stay focused, Morrison replied. We're here to do a job. Quote, The first building they passed showed signs of recent abandonment. Laundry still hung on lines, swaying in the morning breeze. Cooking pots sat outside doorways, their contents long since dried or spoiled. It looked like the residents had left in a hurry, taking only what they could carry. Maya's medical training had taught her to observe details that others might miss. She noticed prescription bottles scattered in one courtyard, indicating someone had left behind critical medications. Children's toys lay abandoned in another yard, suggesting families had departed so quickly they couldn't gather their belongings. "Morrison," she said quietly, "the evacuation pattern isn't random. Look at the positioning of abandoned items. They all face east, toward the main road out of town." Morrison's eyes flicked to his mirrors, scanning the areas Maya had indicated. "You're right. Whatever spooked them came from the west, driving them toward the highway." Rodriguez pulled out her field glasses, studying the buildings ahead. Target structure is 2 blocks north. 3-story concrete building with a green door, just like intelligence described. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. As they moved deeper into the district, Maya's unease intensified. Her grandmother had always told her to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming danger. The positioning was too perfect, the intelligence too precise, the timing too convenient. Morrison parked the Humvee behind a partially collapsed wall that would provide cover during their reconnaissance. The building they'd come to investigate sat across a small plaza, its green door clearly visible from their position. According to intelligence reports, weapons caches were hidden in the basement and second floor. "Dismount and set up observation," Morrison ordered. "Chen, you're with me. Rodriguez, take Palmer and circle around to the east side. We'll observe for 30 minutes, then move in if everything looks clear." Maya gathered her medical pack and followed Morrison toward an abandoned shop that offered a good view of the target building. Her boots crunched softly on broken glass and debris as they moved through the empty streets. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of their supporting units maintaining overwatch positions. Inside the abandoned shop, Morrison set up his spotting scope, while Maya positioned herself near a window that had been partially boarded up. Through the gaps in the wood, she could see the entire front facade of the target building. "Anything?" Morrison asked after several minutes of observation. "Negative. No movement, no heat signatures visible through the windows. But," Maya paused, studying something that had caught her attention. "But what?" "The dust patterns around the building don't match the abandonment timeline. Someone's been here recently, within the last 24 hours. Morrison adjusted his scope, focusing on the areas Maya had indicated. Fresh footprints were barely visible in the dirt near the green door, and scuff marks suggested heavy objects had been moved recently. Their radio crackled to life. "Alpha Team, this is Bravo. We're seeing increased vehicle movement on the eastern perimeter. Count 3, possibly 4 civilian trucks heading toward your location." Maya's blood ran cold. Civilian trucks in this area often meant one thing: insurgents using local vehicles to blend in with any remaining population. But there was no remaining population in Qasr district. "Time to go," Morrison said, already packing up his equipment. Before they could move, Rodriguez's voice exploded through their headsets. "Contact east! Multiple armed individuals moving toward the plaza! We're taking fire!" The crack of rifle shots echoed through the empty streets, followed immediately by the distinctive chatter of automatic weapons. Maya's training kicked in as she shouldered her medical pack and prepared to move. "Chen, stay low and follow me," Morrison commanded, moving toward the shop's rear exit. "We need to link up with Rodriguez and Palmer, then extract to the rally point." But as they reached the back door, the building across the alley erupted in gunfire. Muzzle flashes strobed from windows and rooftops as insurgents opened fire from concealed positions. Maya realized with growing horror that they hadn't walked into a routine reconnaissance mission. They'd entered a carefully planned trap. Morrison grabbed his radio. "Bravo team, Alpha is trapped in the commercial district. Multiple hostile contacts requesting immediate support." The response was barely audible through static and gunfire. "Alpha, Bravo is engaged with enemy forces on the ridgeline. Cannot provide immediate assistance. Air support is 15 minutes out." Quote, 15 minutes felt like eternity when bullets were flying. Maya pressed herself against the wall as rounds shattered the remaining glass in the shop windows. Her medical pack felt heavier than ever, but she knew that in the next few minutes, her supplies might be the only thing standing between her teammates and death. Morrison's face was grim as he assessed their situation. "We can't stay here. This position will be overrun in minutes. We need to move toward Rodriguez and Palmer's last known location." "What about the civilians?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. "What civilians? This whole district is a kill zone. We were set up from the beginning." The truth hit Maya like a physical blow. The intelligence had been compromised, possibly for weeks. The insurgents had used false information to lure American forces into a predetermined kill zone, complete with escape routes blocked and high ground secured. Another burst of gunfire erupted from the building directly across from them. Maya could see at least 3 muzzle flashes from different floors, indicating a well-coordinated defensive position. The insurgents had transformed the entire district into a fortress, using the abandoned buildings as fighting positions. "Rodriguez, report," Morrison called into his radio. Palmer's voice came back, strained and urgent. "Rodriguez is hit! We're pinned down behind a concrete barrier about 50 meters north of your position. She's bleeding bad, Morrison. Real bad." Maya's medical training surged to the forefront of her mind. Rodriguez was wounded and trapped, Palmer was alone and outgunned, and their extraction route was compromised. In her pack, she carried the tools to save Rodriguez's life, but only if she could reach her in time. Morrison saw the determination in her eyes. "Chen, don't even think about it. We can't cross that plaza under fire." But Maya was already calculating distances, cover positions, and medical priorities. Rodriguez had 8 minutes, maybe 10, before blood loss became irreversible. Palmer wouldn't be able to provide adequate first aid under fire. If Maya didn't act, Rodriguez would die. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, indicating that more insurgent forces were moving to reinforce the ambush. Their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Maya looked at Morrison, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I didn't come this far to watch Rodriguez bleed out in a ditch." Quote, outside, the gunfire intensified, and Maya Chen prepared to prove that strength had nothing to do with size. Maya didn't wait for Morrison's permission. The moment she heard Rodriguez's labored breathing through Palmer's radio, her decision crystallized. She burst through the shop's rear door, her medical pack bouncing against her back as she sprinted toward the sound of gunfire. "Chen, get back here!" Morrison's voice roared behind her. But Maya was already committed to her path. The plaza stretched before her like a death trap, 50 meters of open ground with no meaningful cover except for a few scattered concrete planters and an overturned market cart. Bullets immediately began tracking her movement, as insurgent fighters spotted her dash across the exposed area. Maya had studied battlefield medicine for 3 years, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of running through active crossfire. The air around her seemed to buzz with deadly projectiles, each one missing her by mere inches. Her small stature, which had been a source of mockery, now became her salvation as bullets passed overhead where a taller soldier would have been hit. She dove behind the overturned cart, her chest heaving as adrenaline flooded her system. From this position, she could see Rodriguez's location, a concrete drainage pipe that provided minimal cover from the building where insurgents had established their primary firing position. Palmer's voice crackled through her radio. "Maya, Rodriguez is conscious but losing blood fast. Entry wound in her upper chest, exit wound through her back. I've got pressure on the entry, but I can't reach the exit without exposing myself to fire." Maya's medical training kicked into overdrive. Chest wound with through-and-through penetration meant potential damage to major blood vessels, possibly the subclavian artery. Rodriguez had minutes, not hours, before shock set in. The bleeding had to be stopped, and that meant Maya needed to reach her within the next 3 minutes. She studied the terrain between her position and the drainage pipe. 20 meters of broken ground, with a concrete barrier offering cover at the halfway point. The insurgents were firing from elevated positions, which meant she'd need to stay low and use the natural depression in the plaza to her advantage. Morrison's voice burst through her headset. "Chen, air support is 12 minutes out. Hold your position until we can suppress those firing positions." Quote, "Rodriguez doesn't have 12 minutes, Maya replied, already moving toward the concrete barrier. The sprint to the halfway point felt like an eternity. Bullets struck the ground around her feet, sending up small explosions of dirt and concrete fragments. One round passed so close to her helmet, that she felt the pressure wave against her ear, but her small frame and erratic movement pattern made her a difficult target for shooters positioned 40 meters above her. She threw herself behind the concrete barrier, gasping for breath. Her hands shook as adrenaline coursed through her system, but her mind remained focused on the medical emergency ahead. From this position, she could see Rodriguez clearly for the first time. The veteran soldier was propped against the drainage pipe, her face pale and her uniform dark with blood. Palmer crouched beside her, one hand pressed against her chest wound while his other hand held his rifle, occasionally firing suppressing rounds toward the enemy positions. Maya keyed her radio. "Palmer, I need you to maintain pressure on the entry wound while I work on the exit. Do not remove your hand no matter what happens." "Copy that, but Maya, the bleeding from her back is getting worse. I think the bullet hit something major." Maya's worst fears were confirmed. A through-and-through chest wound with increasing bleeding suggested arterial damage, possibly to the subclavian or intercostal arteries. Rodriguez needed immediate surgical intervention, but Maya's field medical kit would have to suffice until they could reach a trauma center. The final 20 meters to Rodriguez's position required crossing completely open ground. There was no cover, no concealment, just empty space between Maya and her wounded teammate. The insurgents had clear fields of fire from multiple positions, and they'd already demonstrated their accuracy. Maya took a deep breath, visualizing the medical procedures she'd need to perform once she reached Rodriguez. Hemostatic agents to control bleeding, pressure bandages to seal both wounds, IV fluids to combat shock, and morphine for pain management. Everything had to be done under fire while potentially being wounded herself. She exploded from behind the barrier in a low sprint, her medical pack now feeling like it weighed 100 pounds instead of 30. The insurgents immediately concentrated their fire on her position, but Maya had learned something crucial during her previous dash. Their shooting positions limited their ability to track low, fast-moving targets. A bullet struck the ground inches from her left foot, followed immediately by two more that passed overhead. Maya threw herself into a sliding dive that carried her the final 10 feet to the drainage pipe, where Palmer immediately grabbed her and pulled her into cover. "Thank God," Palmer breathed, his face streaked with sweat and Rodriguez's blood. "I thought you were going to get yourself killed." Maya was already opening her medical pack, her hands steady despite the ongoing gunfire. "How long has she been unconscious?" "She passed out about 30 seconds ago. Pulse is getting weaker." Maya's examination confirmed her worst fears. Rodriguez had lost significant blood volume. Her skin was cold and clammy, and her breathing was shallow and rapid. The entry wound in her chest was manageable, but the exit wound in her back was the real problem, a ragged hole where the bullet had tumbled after striking bone. "I need you to roll her toward me very gently," Maya instructed Palmer. "Keep pressure on the chest wound while I work on her back." The moment Maya saw the exit wound, she knew Rodriguez was in critical condition. The bullet had struck her scapula and fragmented, creating multiple tissue tracts and severing at least one major blood vessel. Blood was pooling beneath Rodriguez's body, and her pulse was becoming thready. Maya's hands moved with practiced efficiency, pulling hemostatic gauze from her pack. The specialized material would promote rapid clotting, but it had to be packed directly into the wound tract to be effective. This meant Maya would have to probe the wound while under fire, a procedure that required steady hands and absolute concentration. "Palmer, I need you to provide suppressing fire toward the second-floor windows while I work. Don't stop shooting until I tell you." Palmer nodded grimly, understanding that Maya needed him to draw the insurgents' attention away from their position. He began firing controlled bursts toward the enemy positions, his muzzle flashes giving away their location but providing the distraction Maya desperately needed. Maya packed the hemostatic gauze deep into Rodriguez's exit wound, feeling for the severed blood vessel that was causing the massive bleeding. Her small hands, which had been a source of ridicule during training, now allowed her to reach areas that larger medics couldn't access. She found the torn artery and packed gauze around it, applying direct pressure to the vessel walls. Rodriguez's breathing stabilized slightly, and Maya felt a weak but steady pulse. The immediate bleeding crisis was under control, but Rodriguez needed blood replacement and surgical repair within the next hour to survive. "Palmer, help me get an IV started. She needs fluids immediately." Working together under fire, Maya and Palmer established intravenous access and began replacing Rodriguez's lost blood volume with crystalloid solution. Maya administered morphine for pain and antibiotics to prevent infection, turning Rodriguez into a stable patient who could survive transport to a medical facility. But as Maya finished her medical procedures, the tactical situation around them continued to deteriorate. More insurgent fighters were arriving, and their ammunition was running low. Morrison's voice crackled through their radio with devastating news. Alpha Team Bravo is taking heavy casualties on the ridgeline. Air support has been diverted to assist them. We're on our own for at least 20 more minutes. Maya looked at Palmer, then down at Rodriguez's unconscious form. They were trapped in a drainage pipe with a critically wounded soldier, surrounded by enemy fighters, with no immediate prospect of rescue. Rodriguez was stable for now, but she needed to reach a trauma center within the next 40 minutes to survive. And Maya Chen realized that saving Rodriguez's life was only the beginning of their ordeal. The explosion that shattered the morning air wasn't from enemy fire. It was Morrison's Humvee erupting in flames as an RPG struck its armored hull. Maya watched in horror through the drainage pipe opening as black smoke billowed from their primary vehicle, eliminating their planned extraction route. Morrison! Palmer screamed into his radio, but only static answered. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the plaza for any sign of their team leader. Through the smoke and debris, she caught a glimpse of movement near the burning vehicle. Morrison was alive, but he was dragging his left leg and clutching his right arm against his chest. Palmer, Morrison's wounded and exposed. We have to reach him. Palmer's face was grim as he assessed their situation. Maya, Rodriguez can't be moved yet, and if we leave this position, we'll be sitting ducks in that plaza. Maya's mind raced through their limited options. Rodriguez was stable but unconscious. Morrison was wounded and trapped in the open. And they were surrounded by insurgent fighters who seemed to have unlimited ammunition and reinforcements. The drainage pipe provided protection from direct fire, but it was also a dead end if the enemy decided to assault their position. A new voice crackled through their radio, unfamiliar and speaking broken English with a heavy accent. American soldiers, you are surrounded. Surrender now and you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Palmer snorted. Right, like we're going to trust insurgents who just tried to blow us up. But Maya was studying the tactical situation with growing clarity. The insurgents' offer to negotiate suggested they wanted to capture American prisoners rather than simply kill them. This meant they might be hesitant to use heavy weapons that could destroy valuable hostages. Palmer, they want us alive. That's our advantage. How is being captured an advantage? Maya checked Rodriguez's pulse and breathing. Both remained stable, though weak. It means they won't use grenades or RPGs against our position if they think we might surrender. It gives us time to plan an extraction. As if to prove her point, the volume of gunfire directed at their position decreased significantly. The insurgents were maintaining suppressing fire to keep them pinned down, but they'd stopped the intense barrage that had marked the beginning of the ambush. Morrison's voice suddenly burst through their radio, weak but determined. Alpha Team, do not surrender under any circumstances. Rally Point Bravo is compromised. The new extraction point is the water tower, 2 clicks north. Can you reach it? Maya pulled out her map, calculating distances and terrain. 2 kilometers through hostile territory, carrying a critically wounded soldier, while potentially supporting another wounded team member. Under normal circumstances, it would be challenging for a full squad. For a 100-pound medic and a single rifleman, it seemed impossible. Morrison, what's your condition? Maya asked. Broken arm, possible concussion, and my legs messed up pretty bad. I can move, but I can't carry equipment or provide effective cover fire. Palmer looked at Maya incredulously. You're not seriously considering trying to carry 2 wounded soldiers 2 kilometers through enemy territory. Maya was already repacking her medical supplies, organizing them for maximum mobility. Rodriguez needs a trauma center. Morrison needs medical attention. The extraction point is our only option. Maya, you weigh 100 pounds. Rodriguez weighs 160. Morrison's about 220. The math doesn't work. But Maya had been doing different calculations. Her survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training had covered techniques for moving wounded personnel, using leverage and body mechanics rather than pure strength. More importantly, her medical training had taught her how to stabilize patients for transport over extended distances. Palmer, I need you to create a diversion. Draw their fire toward the eastern side of the plaza while I move to Morrison's position. That's suicide, Maya. It's tactical thinking. They want prisoners, so they'll be reluctant to use lethal force if they think we're attempting to surrender. I can use that hesitation to close the distance to Morrison." Palmer shook his head but began preparing his equipment. "This is the craziest plan I've ever heard, but Rodriguez is going to die if we stay here much longer." Maya performed one final check on Rodriguez's medical condition. Her color was improving slightly thanks to the IV fluids, and the hemostatic agents had successfully controlled the bleeding. But Rodriguez remained unconscious and would need to be carried if they were going to move her. Palmer, when I signal, starts firing toward the insurgent positions and moves toward Morrison. "Make it look like we're attempting a desperate assault. I'll follow 30 seconds behind you with Rodriguez." Palmer stared at her for a long moment. "Maya, even if you somehow manage to carry Rodriguez to Morrison, then what? You can't carry both of them 2 kilometers. Maya's voice was quiet but determined. "Then I'll make multiple trips." The absurdity of the statement hung in the air between them. The idea of a 100-pound soldier making multiple trips through enemy territory to evacuate wounded teammates was beyond ambitious. It was seemingly impossible. But Maya had spent her entire military career being told things were impossible for someone her size. She'd been told she was too small for combat operations, too weak for medical evacuation duties, too fragile for deployment to hostile environments. Every assumption had proven wrong. Palmer looked at Rodriguez's unconscious form, then at the smoke rising from Morrison's position. "All right, Chen, but I'm not leaving you to do this alone. We go together, or we don't go at all." Maya nodded, grateful for Palmer's commitment, but knowing that his support would be limited. Palmer was a rifleman, not a medic, and he lacked the training to provide medical care during transport. The responsibility for keeping Rodriguez and Morrison alive during the evacuation would fall entirely on Maya's shoulders. She reorganized her medical pack one final time, distributing weight to optimize her mobility while ensuring she had immediate access to critical supplies. Rodriguez would need continuous monitoring during transport, and Morrison's injuries would likely worsen without proper stabilization. The insurgent voice returned to their radio frequency. "American soldiers, you have 5 minutes to decide. Surrender and live, or die fighting in a position you cannot win." Maya looked at Palmer, then at Rodriguez's pale face. 5 minutes to plan an evacuation that should take hours of preparation and coordination. 5 minutes to develop a strategy for moving 2 wounded soldiers through hostile territory, with no support except her medical training and Palmer's rifle. "Palmer, are you ready?" Palmer chambered around and adjusted his equipment. "As ready as anyone can be for a plan this insane." Maya lifted Rodriguez into a fireman's carry, surprised by how manageable the weight felt when properly distributed across her shoulders and back. Her survival training had emphasized using correct body mechanics to move loads far heavier than her own body weight. "On my mark," Maya said, positioning herself at the edge of the drainage pipe. 3, 2, 1, mark! Palmer burst from cover, firing suppressing rounds toward the insurgent positions while sprinting toward Morrison's location. Maya followed immediately, carrying Rodriguez across the plaza, while bullets tracked their movement through the smoke-filled air. The weight of Rodriguez's body pressed down on Maya's shoulders as she ran, but her determination burned brighter than her physical limitations. Behind them, insurgent fighters shouted commands in Arabic, coordinating their response to what appeared to be a desperate American assault. Maya reached Morrison's position just as Palmer arrived, both of them breathing hard from their sprint across open ground. Morrison looked up at them with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Jen, what the hell are you doing?" Maya gently lowered Rodriguez to the ground behind the burned-out Humvee. "Saving your life, Morrison, all of your lives." And as enemy fighters began moving to surround their new position, Maya Chen prepared to prove that strength had nothing to do with physical size. The first mile was the longest mile of Maya's life. With Rodriguez unconscious across her shoulders and Morrison limping beside them, their small group moved like shadows through the abandoned outskirts of Kasser district. Palmer took point, his rifle constantly scanning for threats, while Maya navigated the treacherous terrain with her human cargo. Maya had calculated that Rodriguez's 160 pounds, properly distributed using a modified fireman's carry, was manageable for short distances. What she hadn't calculated was how the weight would compound over time, or how her own body would respond to the constant stress of carrying another human being while under threat of enemy fire. By the 15-minute mark, her shoulders burned like fire. By 30 minutes, her legs trembled with each step, but Rodriguez's breathing remained steady, and Maya's medical monitoring showed stable vital signs. The hemostatic agents were holding, the IV fluids were maintaining blood pressure, and Rodriguez was surviving the transport. Morrison struggled alongside them, his broken arm secured in an improvised sling Maya had crafted from bandages, his injured leg forcing him to lean heavily on Palmer whenever the terrain became difficult. Maya continuously monitored his condition while carrying Rodriguez, watching for signs of shock or internal bleeding that would require immediate intervention. "Contact rear," Palmer whispered urgently, dropping to one knee and raising his rifle. Maya immediately lowered Rodriguez behind a concrete retaining wall, her hands moving to check pulse and breathing, while Palmer assessed the threat. Through the scope of his rifle, Palmer could see two insurgent fighters approximately 200 meters behind them, moving methodically through the abandoned buildings they'd just left. "They're tracking us," Morrison said grimly. "Professional pursuit, not random patrol." Maya's mind raced through their options. Rodriguez couldn't be moved quickly in her current condition, Morrison's mobility was severely limited, and Palmer was their only effective defensive asset. If the insurgents closed the distance, they'd be trapped with nowhere to run. "How long before they reach our position?" Maya asked. Palmer studied the pursuers' movement pattern. "At their current pace, maybe 8 minutes. But they're being careful, checking every building. Could be longer if they maintain that caution." Maya made a decision that went against every instinct of military doctrine. "Palmer, take Morrison and continue toward the water tower. I'll stay with Rodriguez and follow when it's safe." "Absolutely not," Morrison said immediately. "We don't leave anyone behind. You're not leaving me behind, you're giving me tactical flexibility." Maya's voice was calm but firm. "I can move faster and quieter with Rodriguez alone. You and Palmer can establish security at the next checkpoint." Palmer shook his head. "Maya, if those fighters catch you alone, you'll have no defensive capability while carrying Rodriguez." Maya had already considered this possibility. "I have Rodriguez's sidearm and 3 magazines. More importantly, I have medical training that neither of you possess. If anyone gets separated, it should be me with the wounded soldier." The logic was sound, but Morrison's experience told him that splitting up in hostile territory was almost always a fatal mistake. Yet their current situation offered no good options, only calculated risks that might give them better odds of survival. 5 minutes, Morrison said finally. "If you're not behind us in 5 minutes, Palmer and I circle back." Maya nodded, already repositioning Rodriguez for optimal concealment behind the retaining wall. She checked Rodriguez's pulse once more, still weak but steady, and ensured the IV line remained secure. Rodriguez had now been unconscious for over an hour, but her color was improving and her breathing was more regular. Palmer and Morrison disappeared into the maze of abandoned buildings, leaving Maya alone with an unconscious soldier and 2 insurgent fighters closing in on their position. Maya had never felt more isolated or more responsible for another person's life. She forced herself to remain calm, applying the breathing techniques she'd learned during her medical training. Panic would cloud her judgment and potentially get Rodriguez killed. Instead, she focused on practical considerations, concealment, escape routes, and medical contingencies. The sound of approaching footsteps made Maya's blood run cold. The insurgent fighters were closer than Palmer had estimated, and they were moving with the confidence of hunters who knew their prey was trapped. Maya could hear them communicating in Arabic, their voices growing louder as they approached. Maya made a desperate calculation. If she waited for the fighters to pass, she risked being discovered in a position where she couldn't defend Rodriguez. If she moved now, she risked exposing their location through movement and noise. Either choice could be fatal. She chose to move. Lifting Rodriguez as quietly as possible, Maya began a slow, careful withdrawal toward a drainage culvert she'd spotted 50 meters ahead. Each step required absolute silence while supporting Rodriguez's full weight. Maya's muscles screamed in protest, but she maintained perfect noise discipline. The insurgent fighters reached the retaining wall just as Maya disappeared into the culvert opening. She heard them speaking rapidly in Arabic, presumably noting signs of recent occupation. Maya pressed herself against the concrete wall of the culvert, Rodriguez's unconscious form heavy against her chest, and waited. Footsteps echoed in the confined space as one of the fighters entered the culvert to investigate. Maya could see his shadow approaching through the dim light, his rifle held ready for immediate use. She had perhaps 30 seconds before he would round the corner and discover them. Maya made a decision that would have seemed impossible to the soldiers who had called her weak just days earlier. Still supporting Rodriguez's full weight, she drew the sidearm from Rodriguez's holster with her free hand, thumbed off the safety, and prepared to defend their position. The insurgent fighter rounded the corner just as Maya shifted Rodriguez to a more stable carrying position. For a split second, the fighter hesitated, confused by the sight of a small American soldier carrying a wounded comrade in what should have been an empty drainage system. That hesitation saved Maya's life. She fired 3 rounds center mass, the suppressed pistol making sharp coughing sounds that echoed in the concrete space. The insurgent fighter dropped immediately, his rifle clattering against the culvert floor. Maya didn't wait to confirm the kill. She gathered Rodriguez and began moving toward the far end of the culvert, knowing that the second fighter would investigate the gunshots within moments. Her hands shook from adrenaline, but Rodriguez remained stable and breathing. Emerging from the culvert into afternoon sunlight, Maya found herself in terrain she didn't recognize. The maps she'd memorized showed industrial buildings in this area, but she was looking at open farmland broken by irrigation ditches and scattered equipment sheds. Palmer's voice crackled through her radio. "Maya, we heard gunshots. Report your status." "Contact eliminated. Rodriguez stable. Moving to your location," Maya replied, already scanning for the next piece of cover. But as she began crossing the open farmland with Rodriguez on her shoulders, Maya realized that their tactical situation had fundamentally changed. The insurgents now knew exactly where they were, and they would be calling for reinforcements. The careful pursuit had become an active hunt. Maya had less than a mile to reach the next checkpoint where Palmer and Morrison were waiting, but that mile stretched across terrain that offered minimal concealment. Worse, Rodriguez's condition was beginning to deteriorate again. Her pulse was becoming irregular, and Maya could see fresh blood seeping through the bandages. The next phase of their escape would require Maya to move faster while providing more intensive medical care. Rodriguez needed constant monitoring, Morrison required ongoing support for his injuries, and Palmer was their only effective defensive asset against increasing enemy pressure. Maya Chen looked across the open farmland toward distant buildings where her teammates waited, adjusted Rodriguez's weight across her shoulders, and began the most challenging mile of the journey. Behind her, she could hear vehicles approaching, reinforcements responding to the gunfight in the culvert. Time was running out, her strength was fading, but Rodriguez was still breathing. Maya focused on that single fact as she began crossing the exposed terrain, carrying her wounded teammate toward an uncertain salvation. The irrigation ditch saved Maya's life. As insurgent vehicles roared across the farmland behind her, she threw herself and Rodriguez into the muddy channel, the murky water cushioning their impact as bullets whined overhead. Rodriguez's unconscious body went completely limp in the water, and Maya's heart stopped as she realized her patient might be drowning. Working frantically in knee-deep water while enemy fighters established positions around the farmland, Maya tilted Rodriguez's head back and cleared her airway. Rodriguez coughed once, expelled muddy water, and resumed breathing. The shock of cold water had actually improved her circulation, and Maya could see better color returning to her patient's face. "Maya, where are you?" Palmer's voice crackled through her waterlogged radio. "Irrigation ditch. Grid reference 247 to 156. Rodriguez is stable, but we're pinned down by vehicle-mounted weapons." Morrison's voice joined the transmission. "We can see muzzle flashes from 3 different positions. They've got you surrounded, Chen." Maya pressed herself against the concrete side of the irrigation channel, holding Rodriguez's head above water while assessing their tactical situation. The insurgents had deployed professionally, with 1 vehicle blocking her route forward and 2 others positioned to prevent retreat. They were using the same tactics that coalition forces employed: establish a perimeter, then methodically eliminate targets within the kill zone. But Maya noticed something the insurgents might not have considered. The irrigation system extended for miles across the farmland, connecting to a network of drainage tunnels that ran beneath the main road. If she could navigate the underground system while carrying Rodriguez, they might be able to emerge behind enemy lines. The challenge was that Rodriguez would need to be kept dry and stable during an underground journey that could take an hour or more. Her medical condition had improved slightly, but submersion in contaminated water could introduce fatal infections to her chest wounds. Maya made rapid preparations for aquatic medical transport. Using plastic wrapping from her medical supplies, she created a waterproof seal around Rodriguez's wound dressings. She secured the IV bag to Rodriguez's body armor and established a makeshift breathing apparatus that would allow Rodriguez to remain face-up during any underwater portions of their escape. Palmer Morrison, I'm going underground through the irrigation system. Continue toward the water tower and establish overwatch. I'll surface at grid reference 251 to 162 in approximately 90 minutes. Maya, that's insane, Palmer replied immediately. You'll be carrying Rodriguez through flooded tunnels with no backup. If anything goes wrong, we can't reach you. Quote, Maya was already moving Rodriguez into position for transport through the drainage tunnel. Palmer, those vehicles have heavy machine guns. If I try to cross open ground, Rodriguez dies. The tunnel system is our only option. Morrison's voice was grim but decisive. Chen, if you're not at that grid reference in 2 hours, we're coming back for you. Understood, Chen out. Maya began the most technically challenging phase of Rodriguez's medical evacuation. The drainage tunnel was barely wide enough for one person, requiring Maya to pull Rodriguez behind her through confined spaces while maintaining constant medical monitoring. Rodriguez's breathing had to be checked every few minutes, her pulse monitored continuously, and her wounds kept sealed against contamination. The first 100 meters were the worst. Maya had to crawl backward through the tunnel, pulling Rodriguez by her body armor while keeping her patient's head elevated above the water level. Her own shoulders and back screamed in protest as she maneuvered through spaces designed for water flow, not human passage. Halfway through the tunnel system, Maya encountered her first major crisis. Rodriguez's breathing became labored and irregular, indicating possible pneumothorax, a collapsed lung that could be fatal without immediate intervention. Maya had to perform emergency medical procedures in complete darkness, using only her hands to locate anatomical landmarks. Working by touch alone, Maya identified the correct intercostal space and inserted a needle thoracentesis to relieve pressure on Rodriguez's lung. The procedure was complicated by their confined environment and Rodriguez's unconscious state, but Maya's medical training guided her hands through the life-saving intervention. Rodriguez's breathing immediately improved, and Maya felt a surge of relief that nearly overwhelmed her. She had just performed emergency surgery in a drainage tunnel, while both of them were partially submerged in contaminated water. The absurdity of the situation would have been laughable if Rodriguez's life hadn't depended on Maya's success. Continuing through the tunnel system, Maya began to feel the cumulative effects of carrying Rodriguez for over 2 hours. Her shoulders had progressed beyond pain into complete numbness. Her legs trembled with each movement. Her hands were raw from gripping Rodriguez's equipment and pulling her through rough concrete passages. But Rodriguez was alive, and that singular fact drove Maya forward through exhaustion that should have been incapacitating. Every few minutes, she checked Rodriguez's pulse and breathing. Every quarter hour, she verified the security of wound dressings and IV lines. Maya had become a mobile intensive care unit, providing continuous medical support while navigating hostile territory. The tunnel system proved more extensive than Maya had anticipated. Side passages led in multiple directions, and some sections were completely flooded, requiring Maya to find alternative routes while maintaining Rodriguez's medical stability. Navigation was entirely by compass and dead reckoning, with no GPS signal available underground. After 45 minutes in the tunnels, Maya heard something that made her blood run cold, voices echoing through the passages behind her. The insurgents had discovered their escape route and were pursuing them through the drainage system. Maya could hear at least 3 different voices, speaking in Arabic and moving methodically through the tunnels. Maya's advantage was that she knew Rodriguez's condition intimately and could move efficiently while providing medical care. The insurgents' advantage was that they were unencumbered by a wounded soldier and could move much faster through the confined spaces. The pursuit became a race between Maya's medical expertise and the insurgents' superior mobility. Maya used her knowledge of Rodriguez's breathing patterns to time their movement, moving quickly during periods when Rodriguez's respiration was stable, and stopping for medical checks when her patient showed signs of distress. The voices behind them grew closer, forcing Maya to make increasingly desperate navigation choices. She took side passages that led away from the main tunnel system, hoping to lose their pursuers in the maze of underground waterways. Some passages were dead ends that required dangerous backtracking. Others led to flooded sections that nearly drowned both women. Maya's greatest fear was realized when Rodriguez began showing signs of infection from contaminated water exposure. Her temperature was rising, her pulse was becoming rapid and thready, and her wound sites were showing early signs of bacterial infiltration. Rodriguez needed antibiotics and surgical cleaning within hours, or sepsis would kill her regardless of Maya's heroic evacuation efforts. Emerging from the tunnel system after 73 minutes underground, Maya found herself in terrain that was both familiar and terrifying. She was less than half a mile from the water tower extraction point, but she was also in direct line of sight of insurgent positions that had been established to intercept any American forces attempting to reach the rally point. Palmer's voice immediately crackled through her radio. "Maya, we see you emerging from the drainage outlet. You've got company. Multiple contacts moving to surround your position." Maya looked down at Rodriguez, whose condition had deteriorated significantly during their underground journey. Rodriguez needed immediate medical attention at a field hospital, but they were still 20 minutes away from extraction and surrounded by enemy forces who had anticipated their movements. Morrison's voice joined the radio traffic. "Chen, air support is finally inbound. Apache gunships will be on station in 6 minutes. Can you hold your position?" Maya assessed Rodriguez's medical condition against their tactical situation. 6 minutes might as well be 6 hours if Rodriguez went into septic shock. Maya made a decision that would define both their chances of survival. She would carry Rodriguez across open ground under fire, racing to reach the extraction point before either enemy bullets or medical complications could kill her patient. "Morrison, Palmer, I'm moving to the water tower now. Rodriguez can't wait for air support." Maya lifted Rodriguez for what she hoped would be the final time, adjusting her patient's weight across shoulders that had lost most of their feeling hours earlier. The water tower stood like a beacon in the distance, its metal framework promising salvation if Maya could cover the remaining distance. Behind her, insurgent fighters emerged from the tunnel system, their pursuit bringing them into the same killing field that Maya was about to cross. Ahead of her, more enemy positions opened fire, their bullets kicking up dirt around Maya's feet as she began the most dangerous phase of Rodriguez's evacuation. Maya Chen had carried her wounded teammate for over 4 miles through impossible circumstances. The final few hundred meters would determine whether her extraordinary effort had been enough to save Rodriguez's life. The final sprint to the water tower became a nightmare of bullets, blood, and pure determination. Maya's legs had long since stopped responding to conscious commands, operating instead on muscle memory and willpower that defied every physical law. Rodriguez's weight felt like carrying a mountain, but Maya's grip never loosened, her pace never faltered. Apache gunships announced their arrival with the distinctive thunder of 30mm cannons, their fire raking insurgent positions with devastating precision. But the air support came with unintended consequences. Enemy fighters, realizing their window was closing, intensified their efforts to prevent Maya from reaching the extraction point. A bullet grazed Maya's left shoulder, spinning her sideways but not dropping her. Another round struck her helmet, the impact ringing through her skull like a church bell. Still she ran, Rodriguez's unconscious form creating an impossible burden that Maya somehow transformed into unstoppable momentum. Palmer's voice erupted through her radio. "Maya, hostile vehicle approaching from your 6 o'clock. Heavy machine gun mounted." Maya didn't turn to look. She couldn't afford to break her rhythm or waste precious seconds on tactical assessment. Instead, she poured every remaining ounce of energy into reaching the water tower's base, where Morrison had established a defensive position with the limited ammunition they had remaining. The insurgent vehicle's heavy machine gun opened fire just as Maya dove behind the water tower's concrete foundation. Bullets shattered against the reinforced structure, sending concrete fragments cascading around her and Rodriguez. Maya immediately began medical assessment. Rodriguez's pulse was rapid and weak, her breathing shallow, her skin burning with fever from advancing sepsis. "Morrison, Rodriguez is going into shock. I need to start aggressive fluid resuscitation immediately or we're going to lose her." Morrison appeared beside them, his broken arm still secured in Maya's improvised sling but his eyes sharp with tactical awareness. Chen, the LZ is 200 meters north of here. The extraction bird will be at the station in 4 minutes. Can Rodriguez survive transport? Maya was already preparing emergency medications, her hands working with practiced efficiency despite her own exhaustion and injuries. She needs blood products and surgical intervention within the next hour. This extraction is her only chance. Palmer joined them, breathing hard from his own dash to the water tower. Maya, I've got eyes on at least 12 enemy fighters closing on our position. The Apaches are suppressing most of them, but some are going to break through. Maya administered epinephrine to combat Rodriguez's dropping blood pressure, then began rapid IV fluid infusion to maintain cardiac output. Rodriguez's condition was deteriorating by the minute. The infection from contaminated water exposure was overwhelming her immune system despite the antibiotics Maya had administered. Palmer, help me get Rodriguez into a transport position. Morrison, can you provide cover fire during movement to the LZ? Morrison checked his remaining ammunition, 2 magazines for his rifle and 1 for his sidearm. I can give you suppressing fire, but it won't last long. Whatever you're going to do it fast. The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder as the extraction team prepared for landing. Maya could see the dust cloud kicked up by rotor wash beginning to obscure the landing zone. In less than 3 minutes, Rodriguez would either be on a medical helicopter heading to a trauma center, or she would be dead. Maya made her final medical preparations for transport. She secured all IV lines, verified that Rodriguez's airway remained clear, and administered a final dose of morphine for pain management. Rodriguez had been unconscious for nearly 3 hours, but Maya had kept her alive through impossible circumstances. Morrison, Palmer, I need to tell you something before we move. Maya's voice was quiet but steady. Rodriguez coded twice during the tunnel evacuation. Her heart stopped completely, and I had to perform CPR while we were both underwater. She's alive because of luck as much as medical intervention. Palmer stared at her in disbelief. Maya, you performed CPR in a flooded drainage tunnel while carrying her. She stopped breathing for almost 2 minutes during the pneumothorax crisis. I had to ventilate her manually while inserting the chest tube. Maya's hands continued working on Rodriguez's medical needs as she spoke. I'm telling you this because if she doesn't survive the flight to the trauma center, it won't be because we didn't do everything possible. Morrison looked at Maya with something approaching awe. Chen, you've been performing intensive care medicine for 4 hours while carrying a patient through active combat. That's not supposed to be possible. Quote, Maya lifted Rodriguez for what she hoped would be the final time, her shoulders screaming in protest but her resolve unshakable. Nothing about today was supposed to be possible, Morrison. But Rodriguez is still breathing, and that's what matters. The extraction helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of dust and rotor noise, its crew immediately establishing a security perimeter while medical personnel prepared to receive casualties. Maya stumbled toward the aircraft, Rodriguez's weight threatening to buckle her knees with each step. The flight medic who met Maya at the helicopter door took one look at Rodriguez's condition and began a rapid medical assessment. What's her status? Through and through chest wound with arterial damage, hemostatic agents applied to control bleeding, needle thoracentosis for pneumothorax, developing sepsis from contaminated water exposure, multiple doses of epinephrine and antibiotics administered. Maya's medical report was delivered in clinical terms that masked the heroic circumstances of Rodriguez's treatment. The flight medic's eyes widened as he processed the complexity of medical interventions Maya had performed in field conditions. You did all of this during combat evacuation? Maya helped transfer Rodriguez to the helicopter's medical gurney, her hands finally releasing the weight she had carried for over 5 miles. She needs blood products immediately and surgical intervention for infection control. The sepsis is advancing rapidly. As medical personnel took over Rodriguez's care, Maya finally allowed herself to collapse against the helicopter's bulkhead. Her shoulders were completely numb, her legs trembled uncontrollably, and her hands shook from exhaustion. But Rodriguez was alive, connected to advanced life support systems that would sustain her during transport to the trauma center. Morrison and Palmer climbed aboard the helicopter, both wounded but mobile. Morrison's broken arm would require surgery, and Palmer had sustained shrapnel wounds during their final dash to the LZ. But all 3 soldiers had survived an ambush that should have killed them all. As the helicopter lifted off from the landing zone, Maya watched the abandoned farmland fall away beneath them. Insurgent fighters were still visible in the distance, but they were no longer a threat. The extraction had succeeded, the wounded were receiving medical care, and everyone was going home. The flight medic monitoring Rodriguez looked up at Maya with professional respect. "Sergeant, I've been doing combat medicine for 8 years. What you accomplished today, I've never seen anything like it. She should have died a dozen times during that evacuation." Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. "She didn't die because someone had to carry her. That's what we do. We carry each other." Rodriguez's eyes fluttered open for the first time in over 4 hours. Her voice was weak but audible above the helicopter noise. "Maya, did we make it?" Maya leaned close to her patient, tears streaming down her face for the first time since the ambush began. "We made it, Rodriguez, all of us. You're going to be fine." Rodriguez squeezed Maya's hand with strength that surprised everyone. "You carried me, all the way." "That's what teammates do," Maya replied simply. 6 months later, Corporal Amanda Rodriguez stood at the front of a packed auditorium at Fort Campbell, addressing a room full of combat medics and infantry soldiers. Her left arm remained weak from nerve damage, but she was alive and back on active duty. "The woman they called weak carried 3 wounded soldiers 5 miles to safety," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "But Sergeant Maya Chen didn't carry us because she was strong. She carried us because she refused to let us die alone." Maya sat in the front row, wearing the silver star she had received for her actions during the Hoisted district ambush. Morrison had recovered fully from his injuries and returned to his unit. Palmer had been promoted and assigned to train new medics in advanced casualty evacuation techniques. But Maya's greatest reward wasn't the medal or the recognition. It was watching Rodriguez walk across the stage, knowing that her refusal to accept the impossible had saved not just 1 life, but 3 lives that day in the Iraqi desert. After the ceremony, a young female soldier approached Maya nervously. "Sergeant Chen, I'm about to deploy for the first time. Everyone says I'm too small for combat operations. They call me weak." Maya smiled, remembering her own doubts and the voices that had questioned her capabilities. "Strength isn't about size," she said quietly. "It's about what you're willing to carry for others." The young soldier nodded, her confidence growing. Maya watched her walk away, knowing that somewhere, someday, that soldier might face her own moment of impossible choices. 3 years after the Hoisted district incident, Maya found herself back in Iraq, but this time as an instructor at the newly established Combat Medical Training Center in Baghdad. The facility had been created specifically to train medics in the advanced techniques Maya had pioneered during her heroic evacuation. Her methods were now part of official military doctrine. Maya stood before a class of 40 medics from various coalition forces, demonstrating the modified fireman's carry technique that had allowed her to transport Rodriguez across 5 miles of hostile terrain. The training mannequins weighed exactly 160 pounds, the same as Rodriguez, and Maya insisted that every student, regardless of size, master the biomechanics of long-distance casualty transport. "The key is weight distribution and leverage," Maya explained, positioning the training dummy across her shoulders. "Physical strength matters less than understanding how to use your entire body as a mechanical system. Private Martinez, come forward and demonstrate." Private Jessica Martinez stepped forward hesitantly. At 5 feet tall and 98 pounds, she was even smaller than Maya had been during her deployment. The other students watched skeptically as Martinez attempted to lift the training dummy. "I can't do it, Sergeant," Martinez said after struggling with the weight. Maya adjusted Martinez's hand positioning and body alignment. "Try again, but this time engage your core muscles and use your legs as the primary lifting mechanism. Your arms are just guides." On her second attempt, Martinez successfully lifted the dummy and held it in the proper carrying position. The demonstration sparked murmurs of amazement from the other students, many of whom were larger male soldiers who had assumed size-determined capability. During the Hoisted evacuation, Maya continued, "I discovered that the human body can exceed its theoretical limitations when lives depend on performance. But this only works if you understand proper technique and maintain absolute focus on your mission objective." The training program Maya developed became known throughout military medical circles as the Chen Protocol. It emphasized mental resilience, technical proficiency, and ethical commitment over physical attributes. Students learned not just how to carry wounded soldiers, but how to perform complex medical procedures under extreme stress while maintaining tactical awareness. Maya's influence extended beyond military training. Medical schools across the United States began incorporating her techniques into civilian emergency response curricula. Paramedics trained in the Chen protocol demonstrated significantly improved patient outcomes during mass casualty events, natural disasters, and terrorist attacks. Dr. Sarah Williams, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Johns Hopkins Hospital, had studied Maya's medical interventions during the evacuation extensively. Sergeant Chen performed procedures that should have been impossible in field conditions, Dr. Williams explained to a conference of trauma surgeons. Her ability to maintain sterile technique while performing chest decompression in a flooded drainage tunnel challenges everything we thought we knew about battlefield medicine. The medical community's interest in Maya's techniques led to her assignment as a liaison between military and civilian medical institutions. She spent 6 months at Johns Hopkins, teaching emergency physicians the psychological methods she'd use to maintain medical precision under extreme stress. The secret isn't ignoring the chaos around you, Maya told a group of residents during a trauma simulation. It's using the urgency of the situation to enhance your focus and decision-making speed. When someone's life depends on your performance, you discover capabilities you never knew existed. Maya's story also inspired changes in military recruitment and training standards. The Pentagon commissioned a comprehensive study of physical requirements for combat medics, ultimately revising guidelines to emphasize technical skills and mental resilience over arbitrary strength benchmarks. Colonel Rebecca Thompson, who led the Recruitment Reform Initiative, credited Maya's example with transforming military thinking about personnel selection. Sergeant Chen proved that we were measuring the wrong attributes, Colonel Thompson explained. Physical strength is less important than the strength of character required to carry your teammates through impossible circumstances. The reforms led to increased recruitment of female medics and soldiers who might previously have been considered unsuitable for combat roles. Military effectiveness actually improved as units became more diverse and technically skilled. Maya's influence reached international levels when NATO requested her assistance in developing standardized medical training protocols for coalition forces. She traveled to training facilities in Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom, sharing her techniques with medics from dozens of countries. At the NATO Medical Training Center in Germany, Maya worked with British Army medic Corporal James Mitchell, who had lost both legs to an IED explosion but remained on active duty as an instructor. Together, they developed adaptive techniques that allowed disabled veterans to continue serving in medical roles. Maya taught me that limitations exist only when you accept them, Corporal Mitchell said during their joint presentation to European medical officers. She carried 3 soldiers to safety despite being told she was too weak. I'm teaching combat medicine despite losing my legs. The mission continues regardless of physical challenges. The partnership between Maya and Mitchell resulted in groundbreaking research on adaptive medical techniques and resilience training. Their work influenced disability policy throughout NATO countries and led to increased opportunities for wounded veterans to remain in meaningful military roles. Maya's personal life also reflected her commitment to service and mentorship. She married Dr. Michael Santos, a trauma surgeon she met during her assignment at Johns Hopkins. Together, they established a nonprofit organization dedicated to training civilian first responders in advanced medical techniques. The Santos Chen Foundation provided scholarships for emergency medical technicians, paramedics, and nurses from underserved communities. Maya personally conducted training workshops in inner-city hospitals, rural medical centers, and disaster-prone regions around the world. Every life saved by someone we've trained honors Rodriguez's memory and validates the sacrifice made by all the soldiers who didn't make it home, Maya explained during the Foundation's annual fundraising gala. We carry their memory forward by ensuring that others receive the same quality of care we would have provided. Rodriguez herself became a successful career soldier, eventually earning promotion to Sergeant First Class and assignment as a senior instructor at the Army Medical Center of Excellence. She credited Maya's example with inspiring her own commitment to training the next generation of combat medics. Maya didn't just save my life, Rodriguez told new students during orientation briefings. She showed me what it means to serve something larger than yourself. Every medic who graduates from this program carries forward the standard she established. As Maya stood before her latest class of students at the Combat Medical Training Center, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a soldier too weak for combat to someone whose techniques were taught around the world. The young faces looking back at her reminded her of her own nervousness before that first deployment to Iraq. Some of you are here because others believe in your potential, Maya said to conclude her lecture. Others are here despite people who said you weren't strong enough, smart enough, or tough enough for this job. But I'm here to tell you that everyone who serves as a combat medic possesses the most important qualification: the willingness to risk everything to save someone else. The students listened intently as Maya shared the final lesson from her experience in Qasr district. You may never be asked to carry wounded soldiers 5 miles through enemy territory, but you will face moments when someone's life depends entirely on your knowledge, your courage, and your refusal to give up. In those moments, remember that strength comes not from your muscles, but from your commitment to leave no one behind. And when that moment came, she would remember that the woman they called weak had proven that courage has nothing to do with physical limitations, and everything to do with the size of your heart. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.